The Bismarck was the most powerful battleship Nazi Germany ever built, and it took nearly the entire Royal Navy, a stroke of pure luck, and a squadron of aircraft that looked like leftovers from the previous war to bring her down. In the span of 8 days in May 1941, she sank the pride of the British fleet in under 4 minutes, vanished completely for over a day while the largest navy on Earth searched for her, and was finally run down and destroyed in one of the most consequential naval battles of the Second World War. This is the story of how Britain hunted down Hitler's finest warship, the most feared ship afloat. Bismarck was commissioned in August 1940, the first full-scale battleship Germany had built since the First World War, and a direct statement to the world that the Kriegsmarine could rival anything Britain had at sea. Over 50,000 tons fully loaded, 8 15-inch guns, heavy armor, and fast enough to outrun almost anything capable of outgunning her. In May 1941, under the codename Operation Rhino, Bismarck slipped out of the Baltic under cover of darkness alongside the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. Their mission: break out into the Atlantic and attack the convoys carrying food, fuel, and weapons across the ocean to Britain. If Bismarck reached open water and started sinking merchant ships freely, she could sever the lifeline keeping Britain in the war. Britain could not let that happen. In the first days of the chase, they very nearly failed to stop it. The death of the Hood. British cruisers spotted Bismarck and Prinz Eugen slipping through the Denmark Strait, the narrow, ice-choked gap between Greenland and Iceland, and shadowed them by radar through the night. By the early morning of May 24th, 2 of the Royal Navy's finest warships, HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales, had closed in to intercept. Hood was a legend before she was ever a target, Britain's largest warship, and a symbol of naval power the public had grown up trusting completely. But she carried a known weakness. Hood was a battlecruiser design dating back to the First World War, built for speed rather than heavy armor, with deck plating that had never been fully upgraded to withstand plunging fire from a modern battleship's guns. The two forces opened fire at long range. Within minutes, a salvo from Bismarck found the one weak point in Hood's aging armor and plunged down into a magazine deep inside the ship. Hood broke apart and sank in under 4 minutes. Of the roughly 1,418 men aboard, only 3 survived. It remains the worst single loss the Royal Navy suffered in the entire Second World War, and it happened almost instantly, in full view of her own escort, who could do nothing but watch. Prince of Wales, fighting alongside Hood, took several hits of her own in the same engagement, and was forced to break off, leaving Bismarck and Prince Eugen to sail on largely unchallenged. Bismarck had won her battle decisively. She had no idea what she'd just triggered. Word of the disaster reached the British public within hours, and the shock was immediate and national. Hood had been a fixture of pre-war naval reviews and newsreels for 2 decades. A ship many people had grown up seeing photographs of, a symbol of British naval supremacy that had never once been seriously questioned. Losing her in under 4 minutes to a single salvo wasn't just a military defeat, it was a genuine blow to national morale, at a point in the war when Britain badly needed a win. The hunt and the disappearance. Word reached London within hours, and the order went out immediately. Sink the Bismarck. Nearly every available warship in Britain's home fleet was pulled into the search. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and an aircraft carrier, all converging from different directions on a single German ship somewhere in the vast North Atlantic. Then, less than a day after sinking Hood, Bismarck vanished. Early on May 25th, she slipped away from the British cruisers shadowing her, and for roughly 31 hours, the largest navy on Earth had no confirmed location for the most dangerous ship in the ocean. Making things worse, the British search initially pushed northeast, assuming she was heading back toward Norway, while Bismarck was actually running southeast, making for the German-occupied French port of Brest, where friendly aircraft and U-boats could shield her the rest of the way home. Every hour that passed brought her closer to that protection. Once there, she would be effectively unreachable. The lucky break. Bismarck was found again on May 26th, spotted by a British Catalina flying boat on patrol, and soon after, confirmed and shadowed by carrier aircraft from HMS Ark Royal. By this point, Britain's fast, modern battleships were still too far away to catch her before she reached the French coast. The Royal Navy's last real chance came down to a squadron of fairy swordfish, biplanes with open cockpits and fabric-covered wings, already outdated by 1941, flying off Ark Royal at barely 100 miles an hour, each armed with a single torpedo, flying through a genuine Atlantic gale that had the carrier's own flight deck pitching wildly. The swordfish pressed their attack that evening. Torpedo hits are notoriously hard to land against a maneuvering battleship, but one struck Bismarck's stern and jammed her rudder at an angle, locking her into an uncontrollable turn. She could no longer steer toward France. She could no longer outrun the fleet closing in behind her. A handful of aircraft that looked like they belonged in a museum had just decided the fate of one of the most advanced warships in the world. The end. Crippled and unable to escape, Bismarck was run down overnight by British battleships and cruisers converging from multiple directions. At dawn on May 27th, they opened fire. What followed was less a battle than an execution. HMS Rodney and HMS King George V, along with supporting cruisers, pounded Bismarck for close to 100 minutes, reducing her upper decks to burning wreckage as her own return fire grew weaker and eventually stopped almost entirely. With the ship ablaze, listing, and no longer able to steer or fight, the cruiser HMS Dorsetshire closed in and fired torpedoes into her at close range. Bismarck finally slipped beneath the waves at around 10:40 that morning, brought down by a combination of shell fire, torpedo hits, and deliberate scuttling by her own crew, according to post-war accounts from German survivors. Of a crew of over 2,200 men, only around 114 to 115 were pulled from the water alive. British rescue efforts were cut short when a suspected U-boat sighting forced the ships to withdraw, leaving hundreds of German sailors still in the freezing water. A German U-boat and a weather ship later rescued a handful more survivors the following day. What it meant: Britain avenged the loss of Hood within days, but the cost, across both battles, was staggering. HMS Hood, at least 1,415 dead. Bismarck, over 2,000 dead. Combined, this single running battle across the North Atlantic cost the lives of almost 3,500 men in barely more than a week. Bismarck's wreck was finally located in 1989 by oceanographer Robert Ballard, the same man who had found the Titanic 4 years earlier, sitting upright on the ocean floor, more than 15,000 feet down, remarkably intact given the pounding that sank her. That has kept a genuine historical debate alive ever since. How much of Bismarck's sinking came down to British shells and torpedoes, and how much came from her own crew's decision to scuttle her rather than let her be captured? The wreck of HMS Hood, too, was eventually found, located in 2001 by an expedition supported by the Hood Association itself, along with the Royal British Legion and Britain's Ministry of Defence. Ted Briggs, the last living survivor of the sinking, was aboard the search vessel when it happened, and personally lowered a commemorative plaque onto the seabed near the wreck of his old ship. It was, by his own account, something he had wanted to do for 60 years. Germany never sent another battleship on an independent Atlantic raid after Bismarck's loss. The risk had been proven too high, even for the most powerful ship the Kriegsmarine could build. Britain, for its part, had come dangerously close to losing the hunt entirely. A single missed sighting, a slightly different weather system over the Atlantic that grounded the Swordfish, and Bismarck reaches Brest, refuels, repairs, and lives to threaten the convoys for months or years to come. Instead, the ship built to prove Germany could rule the Atlantic lasted barely 8 days on her first and only mission. It took the loss of one of Britain's most beloved warships, a desperate day-and-a-half disappearance across an entire ocean, and in the end, a squadron of aircraft that never should have been able to get close enough to matter.